All right, today's conversation is with Cal Wysocki. Cal is one of the early members of South Loop Strength and Conditioning back when we were in a hallway, literally a hallway, which was tons of fun for everyone involved. And Cal initially came to the gym as a teacher working in teacher observation, instructing teachers, all that kind of stuff. Branched out, broke free from the shackles of the Chicago public school system to become involved in his own education consulting company called Fulcrum Education Solutions, very official there. And Cal and I spent a lot of time talking about the ins and outs of actually improving the ability to teach people and coach people, as well as how to coach coaches, and the parallels between what he is trying to do as far as improving the ability of educators to educate children is so similar to what we're working on with our coaches at the gym in terms of their ability to manage classroom dynamics, build trust with people, all that kind of stuff. And things that we've had to work through as business owners in terms of our own employees trusting us when we give them feedback, when we evaluate them, when we have, satisfaction surveys, all that kind of stuff. Since there's so many nuanced, difficult social pieces of what's happening as far as conveying information from someone to, improve their snatch or simply to improve their ability to coach a class and take control of it and not let the class sort of, run them over with disruption and chatting and all that kind of stuff. So very, very interesting to hear the ins and outs of how they do that in schools and how they build up the infrastructure with the administration to actually have them carry that work forward when Cal and his team are no longer part of it. So I took away a few great ideas from this as far as things we're going to do with our own coaches in terms of getting them, just held to a higher standard and improving our ability to offer consistent feedback in a way that is helpful for everyone involved. And I think that anyone involved with any type of thing with coaches or teaching people anything is going to see, just tons of tactical value here, as well as strategic big picture things that you just have to be thinking about if you're working in an environment where you're trying to make people better. You told me just a second ago that there was a teacher who one time you were working with this teacher and in this process made this person so upset that they had to leave school and abandon children in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Please elaborate.
Yeah. So it was slight correction on that. I was working with the coach of that teacher. So I was coaching that teacher's coach.
I see.
So I'm one removed, but so she had been, the coach, she had been struggling with this teacher for months. Like he was really getting run over in his classroom. Like kids were just
losing control of the class.
Losing control, not able to get through his lessons, was like plodding forward when he really should have been addressing behavior, so on and so forth. And she was making no headway with him on getting him to improve either. And so eventually he got put on an improvement plan. He actually did pretty well for like a week on the improvement plan. And then like one day, just like a straw that broke the camel's back. He had a bad moment in class that morning. He told his coach about it.
What happened?
I don't actually know the specifics.
Okay.
I just know the aftermath here. And she wouldn't get into the specifics. I don't think it was like that bad. It's not like a kid like threw a chair or anything. It was sort of like probably just more of the same. And he was like, damn it, I'm not actually getting any better at this. And for his lunch, he like got in his car and literally just drove away. And he called his coach while he was like, 20 miles out of town already. And he's like, yeah, I'm not going to make it back into the rest of class. So see you later. I'm done. Not even like 2 weeks notice, not even days notice.
This is my resignation letter.
I'm already 20 miles out of town. It was a little rough. It was hard to talk her off the ledge there about her own coaching after that experience.
Yeah, so everyone involved in the situation is now upset.
Oh, yeah. The children are upset. Coaches are upset. Teachers doesn't have a job anymore.
You're upset.
I'm upset.
Yeah. Cal, what did you do wrong? What did you do wrong to result in this man freaking out?
So many things. I mean, actually, like the interesting part is that the teacher was experienced. He had 4 or 5 years of classroom experience under his belt. And so this was his first year at this new school. So I think part of it was this was probably the first time he'd received any sort of critical feedback on his own teaching, on his own practice. He didn't realize he was as bad as he was because no one had told him that.
Well, so he was just getting hammered in this classroom.
Yep.
And I mean, he probably had some inkling that there was a problem.
Yeah.
But had received no instruction or anything previous to this.
Yeah,
so
no
it's kind
one
of
was
like,
actually like, this is your fault. You can get better at this, and here is how you would do that. Like, this is actually unacceptable, and you need to change something. It was the first time he'd really received any feedback like that. So I think that was a part of it. He just didn't have a history of getting any sort of critical feedback on it. So that was, years of accumulation of like being sold a false story about himself. But I think the coach, too, her approach really did not assist him at all. She, like, her go-to then was like, if she saw something bad going on in class, she would just basically jump in and start teaching the class for him in an effort to, like, quote unquote model. But they never actually spent much time debriefing what she was doing and why that was better and transferring that skill over to him. So she was just like a crutch in the classroom. And whenever she left, it was back to the same old, same old. And he wasn't getting any better. She was frustrated by that. And it was just sort of this roundabout thing that wasn't making any
having
progress.
someone just jump in and take over your class doesn't do anything for trust
Exactly.
either.
Yeah.
And
and
then people look at you as like, oh, well, he either doesn't know what he's doing or like this person doesn't trust him or whatever.
Yes.
That just sends like 25 different signals to all the students that like, don't trust this person.
Yes. Yeah. And they were like, all of the kids knew that too. They were like, he doesn't know what he's doing. I will respect her when she jumps in and I'll fix my behavior. But like, as soon as she's gone, I already know that this guy's a joke. And so her methods were already misaligned with like what the problem was, which was like he had no rapport with his children. He had no trust built up with them. So it undercut like the root of the issue. It wasn't just sort of this mechanical thing of you're not delivering a consequence in the right way or you're not using the right words or whatever. It's like, no, there's a bigger issue that you ignored.
Yeah, those tactics aren't going to make a difference.
No.
Yeah, which I mean, I think that anyone in any sort of management or teaching position has seen that where it's like, oh, like I'll try to do this to get buy-in. And you try, you're like, oh, we're going to like observe classes. And then coaches are like, why are you fucking looking at it? You're like, because we're trying to help you. Right. But you haven't built the trust beforehand.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you do going into a situation like that that's already broken? Mm-hmm. What do you do?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first is not jump to too quick of conclusions. Like that is always my first go-to is like, I need to absorb here. Like clearly there's some stuff happening. And if I come to too quick of a conclusion, I'm just going to be relying on like gut instinct or something surface level, and I will be missing some big component of the puzzle. So my favorite thing to say in first couple of interactions is I don't know, and then ask more questions. I like rarely will give very specific recommendations right off the bat. So I always have to gather more information for my own sake. Do I have quick judgments right away? Yes. Do I let myself say them? No, not at all. And so I have to bite my tongue a lot there just to like make sure I've got the full story. Because I think that was a big part of what was going on here. And in so many cases, like you just jump to your immediate conclusion of like, I see this happening. I want to fix it right away. So I'm going to do the most obvious thing when in fact, the most obvious thing is often really detrimental to what's at the root of the issue. So dig a little bit more, asking both parties what they think is going on. Just sit and listen and observe and watch and draw connections between things. And in a classroom, there's so many connections, like kids to kids and kids to teacher and teacher to coach and coach to kids. It's a very dynamic set up there with
a social web.
It is, yeah, and everyone's a human involved in that. So it's not just these little widgets that are moving around. It's like little midgets with personalities and thoughts and emotions and all sorts of stuff. So it makes it exponentially more chaotic.
So when a school or a district hires Fulcrum Education Solutions, what does that even mean? I mean, we kind of just jumped right into a specific example.
Yeah,
but like what is the pitch that you're offering them, and then what do you actually do?
Yeah,
because I kind of know, and I've read your website, and you used to send a bunch of emails on it, but I don't know if I fully know.
Yeah. And we're still figuring it out too. We're only in our third year, and I think it's changed every single year a little bit.
Are you pivoting?
We are pivoting a little bit. We actually are pivoting. Yeah. Hence the
how
name
entrepreneurial.
Fulcrum. I know, right? Yeah, so our major pitch is that we are supporting the school administration in their instructional leadership, basically the things that they're doing in their building to make their teachers better. By and large, schools are not very good at actually making their teachers better teachers. They'll even say as much a lot of the times that they want to hire the best teachers, but they don't know how to work with teachers who are not right out of the gate, like as solid as they need to be.
Yeah, that you're just relying on people being rock stars on their own, which whatever percentage of people have that capacity.
Yeah. And you do get some of those teachers every now and then. So it develops this like myth of the like needle in the haystack teacher of like, oh, I just need like a better applicant pool. I got to find those teachers. It's like the fact of the matter though is like there's only so many needles in that giant haystack, and we are believing in this like myth of like the perfect rock star teacher, or that's even possible for teachers to like be that.
And on I guess like a bigger picture level of that too. I mean, the pay for teachers is not very good too, right? It's not like you're Google and you can be like, cool, we're just going to hire the 1% of the 1% of engineers. Like, you better be a genius if you want to work here. That schools don't have that luxury of just saying, yeah, cool, we are going to put in place the filters and the whatever to hire the 1% of the 1% because we have this many applicants lined up and we can incentivize them to actually want to do that. That doesn't exist.
It does not exist at all.
There's a few people who are self-motivated to want to go into that profession, but the reality is that you're going to have a lot of B and C players who you want to make the C players B- players and the B players A- players, right?
Yeah, and you have to develop your own. Like you cannot just hire your way out of the problem. And I think too many schools think that they can, so they divert resources there instead of to development. So we help schools shift back towards that. Like, how do we actually grow our own? How do we actually support and build our teachers from within? Recognizing that like we cannot just find the rockstar teachers. We have to grow them ourselves. We have to build them ourselves. And that means we need to be really strong leaders to be able to develop them. We have to coach them in a very specific way and expect them to grow on some sort of progression and not just sort of magically get there because we told them to, or just do these checklist of things and suddenly you're this transformative, magical champion teacher. It doesn't work that way.
And are these schools, are they looking specifically at their test scores? I mean, is that still kind of the metric where it's like, yo, you have to hit these numbers or else your funding gets cut, or like what's their incentive other than the goodness of their hearts to try to motivate improvement?
I mean, schools are driven by test scores. That's just sort of the age we live in these days. And so that oftentimes is the driving factor of like, we got to do something. Is like most of the schools that we work with have hit some sort of plateau where they're sort of middling, where like they're not at the bottom of the barrel. They've got sort of generally, if you walk into their school, it sort of looks like, yeah, this is all right. This is an okay school, but their scores are sort of flatlined, or they aren't getting above a certain space, or they've been stuck for a while. And if you look under the hood a little bit, you realize like, our classroom instruction is not actually as strong as it needs to be. Our teachers aren't actually giving kids what they need to push to that next level. Boy, we better do something about that, because you can't just play with the window dressing anymore. You can't just sort of slap some pretty stuff on it and make the scores go up. Like, there's a lot more hard work to get past that like sort of middle plateau area. So most of the schools that we work with are sort of stuck, and they're looking for that next jump to go from, not to be too banal about it, but like from good to great kind of stuff.
So essentially the district is incentivized to improve their test scores, and they look to someone like you to come in and improve the ability of the teachers to teach, which by virtue of simply making the teachers better will improve their test scores. Right. But it's not necessarily a like, oh, we're going to teach you how to like hammer this test. It's like, yo, you guys don't have control over your classroom. You don't know how to build trust with your students. You don't know how to progress a lesson plan properly. Like, that's kind of the stuff that you guys are attacking.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's from our experience too. Like, we are definitely not in the test prep business, and we even market ourselves as saying like, you will not see student test scores rise in the school for 3 to 5 years of this work. This is like going to be slow, sustained growth and improvement. And that's actually what's going to mean that it is real and authentic growth. Like, you could get a bump in your score somehow.
I'm sure there's tons of low hanging fruit that can just make kids better at like, here's what you do when you're running out of time.
Exactly.
Like just stuff like that. That's very tactical.
Yeah, very tactical stuff. And oftentimes the schools have done those things and are doing those things. And still, that's where they're like, well, we aren't getting any more out of it. It's like, yeah, because you aren't making your kids any smarter because your teaching isn't any better. You actually have to attack the root of this, which is you need better instruction in your classrooms. And to do that, like there isn't a magical fix. You cannot just like make a teacher a rock star teacher in a year. They can see a lot of improvement in a year, but they're not going to suddenly be, state teacher of the year, everyone in that building. So it's a slow process, and it requires, talking about like human dynamics and social web, like it is a very complicated process to coach a professional towards a result. Like it's challenging because we've got a lot of professional, people personalize that work so much. Like you teach for a very specific reason. Like when you meet a teacher, the first thing they say is, I'm a teacher. Let me tell you all about my kids. They have a lot of personal pride in it. So when you start to pick that apart and analyze it and tell them it's not as good as they might think that it is, you need to do that with some tact and some strategy. Otherwise, you're just going to meet a lot of resistance and shortcuts.
So are you coming in and actually coaching the teachers, or are you teaching the administration how to build an internal teaching development program, or both, or does it depend on the school?
Yeah, it totally depends on the school, but we do all of the above. So many of the schools that we work with don't actually have enough sort of internal structure to even begin coaching teachers to like provide enough like manpower and capacity to like get in and observe and give teachers meaningful feedback. So we do that for some of our school partners with the idea of like, we're going to pave the way for you here. We're going to show you what this could look like. And we want to help you then build this so that you've got it internally. We don't think actually like external coaching is a sustainable solution. The best way to do it is actually, to have it in-house so that you've got coaching capacity right there in the school building so that it's always there for teachers. So much is contextual, like you just need to know a lot about the school to coach well inside of that school. So we do that to help schools pave the way. And then we help them set up some of those systems of like, what would the roles look like? How would you distribute? What is a coaching cycle? How frequently do you observe? What does feedback look like in terms of written feedback versus meetings? How does that overlap with evaluation systems? And so once schools have that up and running, or if they already do, then we work with them very specifically on improving their coaching skill. So am I finding the right thing to give feedback on? Am I leading the coaching meeting in a way that gives enough time for practice? Am I getting the kind of buy-in that I know I need from an adult professional and not just like trying to tell them what to do? So lots of factors that then go into the mechanics of being a good coach.
So I would assume that you guys coming in as consultants or whatever, right? That teachers don't want to hear what you have to say. That there's just like an immediate like, oh, cool, I've like been to plenty of these stupid professional development things. You're gonna make me do a trust fall, like leave me alone. So how do you come in and actually get buy-in from teachers if you are coming in and observing them and potentially coaching them?
Yep. Yeah. That is, it's a huge hurdle on the outset. No question about that. And we don't like to even call ourselves consultants in the school. It's got kind of...
Yeah, because that's like such a, consultant.
Yeah, it's just sort of a trigger word for a lot of people, especially in the education world where they think you're just sort of like coming in and you cost a lot of money and then you're going to tell us what we're doing wrong and then you're going to leave. Like our whole model is actually built on like a sustained, like we're going to be there every week. You're going to see us all school year long. We will know your name. We will know your children's name in your classroom. And so part of it is just like, we know at the outset, you're going to be a little skeptical. And so we need to establish some quick trust by showing them that we are actually there for them and not some sort of like malicious or nefarious reason that they think we might be there. We're not just going to tell them they're doing bad and that their admin should fire all of the bad teachers, but like, no, we're actually going to help them help you because what you want is to get better. So once they see
there's so
some of
much
those
conflict between teachers and administration,
there
classically
can be,
too.
Yeah.
Like almost every person who I know who's been involved in teaching has just some horror story of like the administration like doing something outrageous.
Yeah.
And it's obviously one side of the story. So there's always that question like, are you sure that they did that like just to spite you and like screw up your life?
And the
that
answer
seems
is probably not.
Unlikely, but like I'm not sure what to tell you. So I mean, there's already that inherent conflict too between the teachers, and they're like, oh, well, my superintendent like cut funding for this. And like, nah.
Yeah. And that's really different school to school. Like some schools have like very strong cultures and they trust their principal a great deal. Some it's like there might as well just be a brick wall between them. And like you have to send passenger pigeons to like get a message on either side that may or may not get there in the right way. So that can be interesting too, depending on what the culture of the school is. The bulk of our schools have generally strong enough trust between admin and teachers where like we're able to make some pretty quick headway, where they start to see of like, yeah, we're not sort of ratting you out to anyone on the admin. Your job's not in jeopardy, but like I've given you something tangible.
And how do they get you to
feedback?
How do you get them to actually believe that?
Yeah,
because I feel like that like my job is in jeopardy. That you can be like, no, it's not, and people are going to be like, yeah, I don't believe you.
Yeah. Oftentimes it's finding, I think it's different with every person, but I think it's like finding a point of commonality. Like what do they care most about? If it's about like, if they really hate standardized tests, for example, and like that comes out as like a key mindset, like I'm going to latch on to that and be like, oh yeah, I know we got the test coming up and like, yeah, we got to get the score, but like, let's just do what we need to do, but then get back to what we want to talk about. I think I sort of like try and level with them in some way of like, what's your angle? What do you care most about? Let me show you that I actually care about that thing as much and I don't have some different cause than you do. So oftentimes it's not really throwing something else under the bus, but it's like, let me find a common ground and like connect with you on that level and like center our work around that. That helps you realize that I'm on your team, that I'm here for the same reason that you are, rather than just coming in saying like, yep, test scores got to go up, so that means you got to get better. It's like, no, I actually start with like, what do you want your classroom to look and feel like? How close are you to that? When you think about your practice, like what are you best at? What do you struggle at? I start all of my coaching relationships that way. Of like,
it's very like consultative, rather than prescriptive.
Exactly. Like I want you to articulate what you envision this to be, because that's going to give me a lot of insight into how you operate and what's driving you. So then I'm going to use that as I want to make suggestions and recommendations to you later, because now I know what drives you. Now I know how to get something to stick with you a little bit better. So I think a lot of it is like forming personal relationships on that level, and then finding the quick win that I can give them the piece of feedback that actually is a low-hanging fruit. They do it the next day. They see that it worked really well, and they're like, and then they see me back the next week and they're excited to tell me about that. I'm excited to hear about it. And if I mention a kid's name, that also adds a lot of extra oomph of you're really here for this same reason as I am. You know my students in the same way that I do. I get it. Cool. I like this. So it's a slow process and it's different for everybody, but I think it starts with understanding the person.
Yeah, I think that quick win is huge.
Yeah.
Right, that some sort of tangible,
Yep.
Okay, you actually made a difference and I can see it. What are some of the typical quick wins that you see work well with teachers, right? Mm-hmm. Things that are just obvious and easy that they can fix without, reading 10 self-help books.
Yeah. I mean, if there was a standard answer for that, I would have it. It is really different for every teacher. And I would say that is different for if you're a beginning teacher, if you're an experienced teacher, even if you're sort of at the same skill level, what I might tell you to fix right away is going to be really, really different. I mean, oftentimes there are some quick, just sort of lesson planning things of asking them what did you want kids to learn today? Did you tell them that? Was it clear to them that that's what you wanted to learn? Oftentimes I'll be like, why don't you say, before you start your lesson, why don't you tell them what you want them to learn today? See how that changes how they interact with things and the extent to which they can do that at the end of the next lesson. And for some teachers, that's mind-blowing, and that's it. And they get to the end of the next lesson after they tell the kids what they want them to learn, and boom, it happened. So oftentimes that can be a very obvious quick win that changes a great deal about how kids interact with their instruction without really changing much about their teaching practice at all. For others, it's just sort of hey, you just gave that direction. Did you notice how many kids didn't follow it? Okay, after you give a direction, why don't you stop for a second before you go help a kid? Stop and watch, make sure everyone's doing it, and then go help the kid that you see needs help. mind blowing, little tiny things that you can find that are just very quick wins that just don't cross a teacher's mind for one reason or another. Not that they don't know to do them. It's just sort of like there's so many things in a teacher's mind at any given second that they forget about sometimes the very easy, simple things that make a big difference.
Yeah, I think that something that we've noticed with our coaches that we started implementing in the last several weeks is that when they're actually giving instruction, that they need to stop the music, which has been an unbelievable change. Where it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to just have the music playing quietly, but the difference between the music being stopped and the music playing quietly in terms of, again, people's ability to actually just follow through and do what you say. Or, if you are doing something like, hey, like the point of this workout is to feel this, and this. With the music stopped, like the feeling of just like chaos in the gym goes down by like a factor of 10. And it seems so trivial, but it's been unbelievable. Like you can just see the control of classes just like go through the roof, where like people just actually do what you tell them now. And they actually understand the point of the workout. And they're not, when the music is on, they feel more inclined to like start their warm up while you're still talking, like all kinds of stuff like that, because it just feels chaotic. You just cut that out and like, boom. Huge difference.
Parallel is just like, do you have everyone's attention when you're about to give directions? Like, make them stop. Even if they're not done with that last thing, tell them it's okay. Stop. Give your attention to me. Let me tell you what to do next. It's the amount that the kids will follow your directions afterwards. It's freakish if you just get them to pay attention. It's not rocket science in many ways, but it's also not intuitive in many ways either.
Do you find that teachers have a hard time? I don't know if comfort is the right word, but let's just roll with that. Potentially being comfortable, stepping into that role of like, hey, you have to pay attention to me right now, and like I'm not moving on until you're actually looking.
Yes, I think a lot of teachers struggle with that because they also think it should be something that kids sort of inherently do. That like if you're a good student, quote unquote, you do that. And so I'm going to treat you like that. So I don't feel like it's my job to have to do that. You should just naturally do that for me because I'm the teacher and you're the students. Where it's like, well, no, you have to learn that behavior. So if they haven't learned it yet, then you have to expect it. And they'll only give it to you if they respect the fact that they're going to, hear something important when you gather their attention. I think oftentimes like teachers just sort of believe that students should come in behaving a certain way or knowing how to do school in a certain way, when it's like, no, we actually can't always make that assumption. And you also kids don't just give that to you. You gotta earn that
over time, for sure.
And that's through like trust and relationships and knowing that they're learning something from you. If they don't think they're learning from you, they're not going to give you their attention. Even if they know in the class next door that they give the attention every single time, they know they learn from that teacher and not from you. Kids are real smart that way. Kids are very in tune with that.
That's interesting. It's almost like they get caught in this like weird polarity between not wanting to be strict. So they don't want to like yell and scream and like hit the desk with a ruler or like whatever the teacher does in like a cartoon, right, to get attention. But then they also are assuming that children should be behaving in a specific way that they're not. So like, well, I don't want to do this thing that I know is bad, but everyone should be like I want them to, and they're not. And then it's just this like...
It's a weird tension.
You're just like bouncing back and forth between not knowing what to do, and then you'd probably have a freak out. I can think of... dozens of teachers I've had in my life that had some like insane freak out moment in class, and you're just like, what happened? Why did that happen?
I've had them myself. I mean, that's like basically the story of my first 2 years of teaching, is like vacillating between those two extremes of like way over exaggerating and being like the strict Mr. Wysocki, and the like, well, they should just be doing it anyways. I'm just going to keep moving forward. It's like, no, neither of those is the answer. Like, knock it off, figure out what you want, Cal, and like get it. It's not that hard, but it can be. It's not intuitive oftentimes.
And how do you teach teachers to, I guess, I don't know what the right word is for that, but feel comfortable commanding attention and being authoritative without being, strict or obnoxious or rude?
I mean, practice, to be honest. Like in a coaching session, if a teacher is struggling with that, like we will script it out. Like oftentimes I think they just need the words. They don't know what it would sound like to come out of their mouth, like what words they would actually say to get that to happen. So we will script it out. Like I will write it out for them, and then I'll do it. I'll get up, just me and that teacher, and I will model for them what this would sound like.
So
and
like you actually role play it.
That's great. We role play in a coaching meeting. So it's sort of like isolate that single skill so that you can feel more comfortable putting it back into the game, into the full practice when you're there teaching. So yeah, we will oftentimes in coaching meetings like role play and practice and just practice getting the words out of your mouth. I will model it in a couple of different tones. I will like do it in a very quiet tone. I will do it
now.
What should I give a direction for?
I don't know. What's an example?
Okay, let's say I need you to like stop working on something and you're about to pass in some papers. Oh boy, it's been a while since I've done this. I gotta get my teacher voice back on. It's like, okay, class, I know everybody's still working, so I need your attention right here. It doesn't matter if you're finished or not. Please stop. Thank you, Todd. I see your eyes. All right, I got everybody. You can get back to work in just a second, but what I need you to do is I want you to finish whatever you're writing on, and then in a minute, we're going to transition to this next activity. So I want you to pass in that paper no matter where you are. It's okay if you're not done. Okay, so let's ask a couple of questions here, make sure that we know what's going on. Todd, how long do you have before we're switching to the next thing?
1 minute.
You got 1 minute, exactly. Does it matter if you're done, Todd?
No.
No, it doesn't, not at all. Okay, so you got 1 minute. Let's get to the next spot. Cool, go. Right, so that'd be like a calmer way of like, I'm leveling with the kids a little bit
But
more.
you're doing like 15 things there, right? There's like so many different subtle things that you do in saying that, that I can imagine a teacher, not having the capacity to nail all of those and thinking they're kind of doing something like that, but they're not, right? I mean, like you are intuitively understanding what the student's concerns are, right? You're saying, okay, like a good percentage of you are not going to be done and you're going to be worried about that. So I need to address that, right? I mean, you're calling out individuals by name who you see either as potentially not paying attention or as leaders in the classroom that you know. If
I was worried Todd wasn't going to give me his eyes, so I like commented on it.
Yeah, exactly, right? You're making someone repeat back what's going on, right? Potentially that person who you view as a leader or who you want to make sure is bought in, which then also the students are more likely to potentially listen to that person and not just you, because it's not just the teacher, droning on and on and on. And that's a lot in like a segment of speech.
But there was also like the tone of that was still like we're in partnership of this together. We got to get to this next thing in a minute. And it's not just because like boom, 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 I'm telling you to, but it's like, okay, we've got somewhere else to be. And like my tone is even conveying like, okay, let's move forward. Like, I know you're not done. It's okay. Cool. We'll get there. Take your time, but like be urgent about it. You know? So it is pretty complex, and you have to know what that next thing is too. You have to know what's coming up in a minute to be able to even mean the words that you say. Oftentimes I think teachers who struggle with that, they actually don't know what's coming next. They don't know, they might have it in their lesson plan, but it's not really drilled into their brain. So they don't really sort of get how or why they would deliver those instructions.
Yeah, so they're not even like, for you to even be in the position to want to do something like that, you have to say, okay, cool. I have 20 minutes left in class. I need to be starting this next section in the next 3 minutes. So you already have to have that set up in your head in order to give an instruction like that.
And another way to do it, right? So that was a much more like, I don't know, collegial way, more of like a in partnership kind of way. Another way to do that would be like, okay, all eyes on me in 3, 2, 1, Todd, I need your eyes. That's a demerit for not giving me your eyes right away. Okay, we have 30 seconds to pass in our papers. At the end of this timer, when the timer goes off, I need your desk to have your notebook in the middle, your pencil in the spot that it always goes in, and your eyes on me. You've got 30 seconds. Go. Timer, right? Like that could be another way that a teacher would deliver those instructions in a very different school environment. That's like a much more sort of authoritative way, no less different than like, I didn't address some of the concerns that a student might have, but like some teachers' personalities align with that much more. And some schools just like want their classrooms to look like that. And other schools, it's sort of like you find your own teacher personality, and like you got to be able to understand how differently it could look. And so that's part of it as a coach too. I have to understand like what are all of the possible ways to get to that same outcome. What I really care about in that room is like kids are moving along urgently through this lesson and you're getting through everything you need to do and they're following the directions. I don't care if that is a more, friendly tone or if it's a more authoritative. I'm sure I have personal opinions about what's going to be better there, but like I want you to run your class how you want to run it. So I might have to model this in 3 or 4 or 5 different ways, a couple of different times for you to find, the version that sounds most like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think something that's interesting about that too is that in both of those examples, even the friendly one, your vocal tonality was going down at the end of every statement, even if it was a question, right? Which I think that's one of the most valuable coaching tools that I've noticed. Again, just trying to coach our coaches in terms of like what we want them to do, and that. Even in a CrossFit gym where you have, adults who are taking time out of their day and paying to be there,
yep.
If you give people instructions in a way that sounds like you don't know what you want,
yep.
that they don't trust you.
Yes.
Like it's just like this immediate, like subtle social cue to like not pay attention. So, when you're not like, okay, class, how long do we have?
Yeah.
Right. You're like, how long do we have?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everything's a statement.
Yep.
And it can be in a friendly tone of voice or it can be in a firmer tone of voice, but none of it's even like harsh or yelling. It's just everything is down at the end, which like whatever reason in our monkey brain that just like is like, oh, I better do what this person
conveys
says.
some sort of like, strength or expertise or whatever it is. Yeah. Because like another way that goes like, okay, I need everyone's attention. I think we should pass on our papers now. I think we got to move on. It's like, okay, no one's listening to that teacher. No one's following those directions. So you have to sort of play around to find your teacher voice, I think is a good way to think about it. So as a coach, I need to know all of those teacher voices and kind of play around with them myself to like help somebody find out what's most authentically going to fit them.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about some more, I guess, specific tactical stuff for teachers that you kind of jump in with. When you are looking at, you mentioned like a 3 to 5 year project in terms of like, all right, we need to rebuild how the teachers function at the school and how the school develops teachers. What is your, I guess, assessment process there? Like, what are you looking at as far as like big buckets?
Yep.
What are the categories that you need to improve?
Yep. So we have developed
test scores.
Yeah. Right. We do look at like external metrics like that. That's not, we don't overlook that, but we've basically developed our own sort of internal metric system. We call it our instructional leadership index. Basically, like here are the key behaviors that like schools that operate with strong instructional leadership exhibit. And there's 3 big buckets inside of that. There's instructional coaching, there's professional development, and then we call it vision-based structure. So it's like, what are all of the systems you have in place in the school to make all of this operate in a productive way, driving towards your vision for your school. So we talk with teachers, we talk with administrators, we observe classrooms, we observe coaching meetings, we'll trail people as they're going to observe and ask them what they saw. We just sort of get right in there and shadow them for a long period of time and just sort of see what normal operations are for them. We make a big deal of like, please do not put on a dog and pony show. I'd rather see your worst day than you having prettied up a day for us. Like, we won't be able to help you if you pretty up this day. So we make a big point of like, don't change anything. You don't need to tell the teachers that we're here for any specific reason. We're just going to come in. We want to see a normal day of instruction and coaching and school operations. So then we sort of size up the school based on like what we saw there of like, what are some of the characteristics in our instructional leadership index that you already have in place? Like, what are the things you're already doing? What are you not doing? Of those things you're not doing, what are the biggest priorities right now, given your context that we could actually put in place in the next school year to push that forward? If we're to play this out over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what are all of the, what's sort of the progression across that? And oftentimes that sort of spirals back on itself to say like, okay, we need to put a clearer coaching cycle in place because teachers never know when they're going to get observed, and so there's no consistency to it. So let's put something in place here, and then we'll work on that and just consistency in year 1. In year 2, when we're being consistent, we can actually work on some of the skills involved there and make your coaches have better conversations with you. But then in year 3, we actually want to come back to that cycle to actually make it overlap with professional development a little bit more. So it's sort of like this circuitous path that spirals these 3 big buckets up together. And then so all along that, we're looking at sort of externally validated metrics as well. It's like, let's monitor those test scores. Like, how well did this influence these things? Let's monitor teacher evaluation scores. Let's monitor, there's a whole bunch of tools.
And do you have a system that you have the schools implement for teacher evaluations? Are these done by students? Are these done by...
Most schools have something in place already. We don't, if they've got one, we don't impose something external. Like if they've got something, we're not going to make them do double. They've got their own data. If they don't have that, we would provide something for them of like, here, let's do this to measure it. Oftentimes that would be part of our support plan for them anyways, of like, we need some way to know how teachers are doing. So let's put that in place. So but we work with what their context is.
There's obviously not going to be a specific example that's relevant for everyone, but is there potentially a specific example of like what it typically looks like when you come into a school? Like what do you typically see is missing, and what are they already doing well?
Yeah. In general, the thing that is most frequently missing, it's probably not surprising, is consistency. Is like, administrators know that they should be observing classrooms and giving feedback, but there's so many things that they are in charge of that is sort of ironically, instruction and learning is the first thing to fall off an administrator's plate.
What are administrators doing otherwise? I mean, I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, discipline issues, parents coming in, dealing with like the district and superintendents and all of those things, operational issues like lunch and buses and a bathroom overflowing and a kid puked in the hallway and just stuff like that. Things just come up. Personnel issues like a teacher is out today, out sick, so we've got a sub in the building, or now I've got to coordinate classroom coverage. I've got testing this period for these grades, and I've got special education IEP meetings for individualized education plan meetings for some students are getting diagnosed for that, so I have to go sit down on those things. I've got regular grade level team meetings that I've got to go to. I've got a plan for PD. I've got a parent teacher association meeting after school. Like, the list is extraordinarily endless. And I don't blame them. Like, what is the most movable thing? It seems like observing classes. It's like, talking to you right now, it seems like that should just have like a sacred place on the calendar where it's like, this doesn't move. Yes.
But unless you already have, a pretty rigid system for how you control your to-do list and what you're doing and your own schedule, that's if you're doing it on an ad hoc basis, it's never going to happen.
It never happens. And that's sort of the biggest thing that we see with schools is like, they have all of the intentions. They might even have the plans and they've got some of the basic infrastructure to make it happen. They just don't do it. They just are not consistent with it. And so that's sort of one of the biggest things that we, sort of a quick win that we get on a school level is just like, let's make that some carved sacred time. And so we build our support saying like, every 2 weeks, I'm going to be here all day long. That means like, we're going to get into classrooms that entire day that I'm here because that's what you need to make this happen. And helping them actually be consistent with that.
So what for you would an idealized, I guess, teacher development program look like? I mean, are there all hands meetings? Is it how often are people being observed? How much individual, I guess, coaching is there of a specific teacher? What does that look like?
That's a really great question. I think in an idealized world, you've got a well-coordinated multi-pronged system. You've got some full school professional development where we've got, as a school, we're working on this larger priority. We're doing some professional learning sort of across grade levels, across content areas. This is something big that we're working on as a school.
And like, what would that be?
That might be something about, like rigor, for example, of like, what does it mean to actually have rigorous questions or have our assessments be rigorous enough? Let's use, let's improve literally the challenge of our work we're putting in front of kids. So all year long, we're actually, as a full school, going to be diving into the rigor of our assessments, how challenging the work is. That could be something like it. Could be any number of things. But coordinating that then with like really consistent individualized coaching. So I think in an idealized world, most teachers are probably on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis where they're getting observed and having like a coaching meeting.
And then who's observing them?
An administrator, I will say. And I think what that looks like is different in every school. Like some schools that might be a dedicated assistant principal who is observing all of the teachers. In some schools that might be, sort of like a teacher leader where like they're a part-time teacher and a part-time coach.
Would that be like a department head or
yeah,
something
like a department
that?
chair would be a good example, or a grade level lead. And different schools make different decisions about that. And I don't think there's one of those that's preferable
But
than
it's usually
another.
not someone's full-time job to be doing that.
It depends.
Okay.
Some schools will have like full-time dedicated instructional coach. More often than not, it is somebody who's got multiple other hats, whether it's your own classes that you're teaching or you've got other administrative duties and responsibilities that you're working on. So any number of those sort of organizational ways to do it can work. The more important part is that it's consistent. And so like if you're saying I'm going to observe teachers on a bi-weekly basis and meet with them, by God, you better be doing that. And like the second you stop is when you start eroding trust with your staff, because now they're expecting something that you're not delivering on.
And then every initiative then just becomes, here's another thing we're going to do that will last for 3 weeks.
It'll
and then not
come
happen
and go
anymore.
and we won't follow through on it. Yeah. Really being consistent with that. And I actually think like having some way to differentiate up or down. So like if a teacher is struggling, that you can sort of increase their coaching to like maybe it's twice weekly, or if you're normally on a bi-weekly, I'm going to coach you weekly, as well as differentiate in the other direction of like, you're actually really solid. I'm going to meet with you once every 3 weeks, and I want you to drive that. Like you're sort of the big problem in your classroom that we're going to try and solve, but you're really going to come to me with ideas, and I'm just going to be a thought partner for you. So being able to differentiate that on an individual level, I think is ideal as well.
And how do you differentiate observation from coaching?
What do you mean?
I mean, I would say that, observing someone is like sitting there, okay, I'm going to take a bunch of notes on this, right? Like here's some stuff I see, whatever. But then what does that process look like of, okay, cool, now we're going to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think of them so intertwined that I'm like, what do you mean? They're like observation and coaching are like one and the same.
Yeah, I mean, is it like one session where?
Yeah, I mean, I always think about it as sort of like an observation coaching cycle of like, that's part of like our collective work together in that cycle. So like when you're observing, like you're noticing probably a lot. You're taking a ton of notes. You're gathering a lot of data and information about what's happening in the classroom, both with kids, with the teacher, with like looking at student work after the fact of how they actually learned, and sort of distilling all of that down to say like, okay, what was really going on here? Let me sort of sift through all of the things that I could give feedback on. Because like when you're in a classroom, you can see a million things that should change.
Yeah, it's like correcting someone's movement. Or it's like, how was that snatch? You're like, well, you did 18 things wrong.
But if you tell them 18 things, they won't do any of them because they can't remember it. So it's sort of like, what's the one piece of feedback that's going to be the most important for delivering to you right now? So it's literally the exact same thing. Like you can't fix somebody's snatch if they've got 18 things wrong with it. You find one thing, say like, knees back. That's the thing that you got to do, or elbows high, or whatever other cues that you would give in fixing a snatch. It's the same idea of like, I need to prioritize one of those things that I think is going to be most impactful. So that's a lot of work that we do with our coaches, is helping them sift through that. Just sort of like, let me help you prioritize what actually is going to be a higher impact thing to give feedback on. And then once you've got that, how do you turn that into actually delivering it to a teacher, whether that's through written feedback or if you've got an in-person meeting, how do I actually get you to believe the same thing that I believe and you to be invested in that piece of feedback I'm about to give you? Because it's not always as easy as saying like, write your objective on the board or, plan a better lesson.
Yeah, you'll get 5 to 10% of people who can just be told something and be like, oh yeah, it makes sense, and execute.
Yep.
And most people can't.
Exactly.
And that's confusing barrier to me.
Yep.
Where I'm like, well, why don't you just do it the way that makes sense? But I'm sure that I have blind spots about areas where I don't do that. So are these teachers then, are they meeting with the person who's observing them regularly independent of the observation, or is that?
Yeah. So it'd be sort of like post the observation, then it's sort of like, let's sit down together and debrief. And maybe it's the same day, maybe it's a day later, maybe it's 2 days later, maybe it's a week later. It depends on sort of how you've set up that cycle. And I think that matters less than the fact that it is happening consistently. And as long as you've articulated how it should happen and it is happening in that way, like you've built enough trust to make that worth it. I don't think there is sort of like it needs to be within, 48 hours of the observation for it to be, fruitful. Like now I observe some teachers 1 week and I don't meet with them until the next week about that same lesson. It's still just as powerful because it's consistent. They know that that's how it's going to work and that's how we've got it set up. So, yeah.
And then what do you see as, let's pick a specific example of something that, what did you say, writing your objective on the board, right? So say you want a teacher to do that. You say, hey, like it would be great if you write the objective on the board. Students are going to have a better understanding of what they're supposed to focus on. Then they can pay attention and sort of be able to process the information better. It's going to go great for you. Teacher's like, yeah, awesome. Doesn't do it. What does that process look like?
Yeah. This is where I think a lot of coaches go wrong, because then they're just like, you didn't do it. Why didn't you do it? Just do it. And that means that you actually haven't gotten to the root of the issue, that you actually haven't figured out like why that teacher isn't doing it in the first place. And do they find any value in that? Have you built up the value of that action? And the answer is no, you haven't. So then you have to think about like, well, why is that? What does this teacher value? And how can I make them value the thing that I want them to value? So in a case like that, I would take an entirely different tack. I wouldn't be like, you're in trouble for not writing your objective on the board. It's like, okay, so let's look at your students' work from last class. Let's really pick this apart. What did you want them to learn from this? Okay, who got it, who didn't? Let's sort it into piles. Now, of the kids who got it, how precisely did they get it? Is this exactly what you wanted? Basically get them to see that perhaps if you had written a clearer objective on the board, and I'm assuming here in this scenario that it would play out in the student data and the student work of like, let me build a case for you because I know you care about the end product. I know that that's something that about you as a teacher that resonates with you. So let me show you sort of on your turf why this action that I want you to take is actually playing out negatively in something that I do know that you value. So then I can connect those two things in your value schema to get you to actually adopt this. I think this is the thing of like, when you're a coach in the classroom, if you're lucky, you're in there for like 2% of all instruction over the course of the entire year. It means like you can't just manage your way to get a teacher to do something. They'll do it for that 2% of the time that you're there next. But what about the 98% of the time that you're not in the classroom? That's the percentage of time that you have to coach for when you're not looking.
Yeah, so you would be, in this example, you would be looking and saying, okay, well, this teacher is having a problem with students overall not really understanding the point of what's going on.
Yep.
Low-hanging fruit, write your objective on the board.
Yep.
Because the kids don't know what to focus on and you're not telling them, and it doesn't matter how good your lesson plan is if they can't pay attention to the thing that
if they don't know what they're supposed to learn from it.
Okay, cool, sounds great. You're not doing it. Now I need to sort of circle back and Socratically question you into recognizing this might be a good idea.
Yes.
In order for you to do it on your own.
Yeah. If you want that to be a lasting part of what they do moving forward all the time, yeah, that's how you have to do it. If you just want them to write your objective on the board, you can say like, I'll be back every day. And if it's not written on your board, I'm going to write you up. That's a bad way to do that. They'll do it. I guarantee they'll start doing it, but not for the right reason. And it won't actually influence what you want. It won't make the change that you want to have made, which is kids learning more, kids understanding what they should be learning.
Yeah. And what are the bigger picture things that teachers do care about? I mean, you mentioned that, they probably do want the students to learn and to get it over time.
Yeah.
Right. So, that seems like an easy one to come back to like, hey, this is what we're trying to work on.
Yeah.
What is stopping you from getting there?
Yeah.
Like, let's hash this out.
Yeah.
But what's something else that is a lever that you can pull on that teachers resonate with?
Yeah. That one is I always operate from an assumption of like kids or teachers always have the best of intents for kids. And I think oftentimes administrators don't go in with that. Like they actually think that like teachers don't care about students. And it's like, no. They wouldn't be doing this like pretty poorly paying job every day if they didn't care about students. So I think like going back to student learning and like looking at student work is always a good way to do it. Most teachers also really care about their relationships with students and sort of like the social emotional side of teaching, and the social emotional development of their kids as like human beings. So that's oftentimes a big thing to pull on as well, of just sort of like, let's talk about sort of like the mood and feeling of your classroom and how kids are responding to it and sort of their growth as people. And like, you know, I think in particular, sort of like in challenging discipline or management situations, that can resonate really well of like, what do you want them to learn as a person? How do you want them to grow socially or emotionally this year? That then you can use that as like a lever to keep coming back to, and a target that resonates really well with the vast majority of teachers. They care about kids, and they care about like kids being better people. So that works usually pretty well too.
Yeah, awesome. And so you probably have these frameworks that you can pull on. And you say, okay, I sort of know what you care about. How can I connect this sort of like abstract, seemingly fluffy concept to like your actual daily behavior in the classroom?
Exactly.
And get you to draw that connection almost yourself so that you have buy-in to the behavior change.
Yeah. Let me just lay out some evidence and observations, and I'm just dropping breadcrumbs down a path, and you're going to make that connection between the thing you care most about and the thing I want you to do. It's sort of a sneaky way of coaching, but it's the most effective way too, because like they've gotten there themselves. They've made the path to change their behavior, not just me telling them to do something.
Yeah. Something that I see a lot with our coaches that we've been working on is not necessarily what they're doing, which can be an issue sometimes, but a lot of the times they just have a lot of ideas that get in their own way, right? Where there's just a lot of stuff that they do that is totally self-defeating, and they're trying to serve some sort of higher purpose like we talked about, right? A great example here would be, being very concerned with people not screwing up the structure of the workout and keeping the class on time. Like these are two things that they really want to happen, which is great. Like definitely good job. Keep the class on time.
From an athlete perspective, it is helpful when that happens.
You want the class to be on time. You want people to know what they're doing in the workout. An example of this, what we would see happening is the coach would bring everyone over to the whiteboard, then ramble for 7 minutes, just totally unstructured word vomit about like all this different stuff that could happen, all this stuff that they don't want people to do, all this stuff they do want people to do, various options for things that they could potentially do. Music is playing, no one is listening. None of the people who are in this class even have the context to understand 60% of what the coach is talking about.
Right.
Coach says, okay, cool, like let's go do it. Sends people loose. No one took in any of the information that they were supposed to take in. Sets up in an insane way. The gym is chaos. Equipment is everywhere. No one knows what's going on. Coach spent 7 minutes at the whiteboard, so is now running behind, so is freaking out about time. And it's just this like, you're trying to do the right thing. But you are just screwing it up so badly.
Shooting yourself in the foot.
Like you're just doing the actual worst thing you can do for this. Right. So I mean, for us, what we've been working on is, hey, listen, like bring people to the whiteboard quickly, then you need to get them moving as soon as possible. So you have way more leverage as a coach to get people to understand what's happening when they're moving. Also, when they're moving, you can set them up with their equipment where you want them. So rather than turning them loose like a bunch of zoo animals to wander around and get distracted and set up wherever they want, you bring them over with their equipment. You say, all right, cool. You guys over here, you guys over there. I want the bikes on this side. I want the barbells on this side. Now you've gotten everyone in place. You've set up their equipment properly. They understand what they're doing because they're actually moving through it and they can feel it. And you can do all that in the same 7 minutes it took you to ramble at the whiteboard where nothing happened.
That is so oddly similar to just like thinking about being a teacher and running a lesson in the classroom of just like, you have to visualize it. That's the thing, is like you've put in a little time on the front end to visualize exactly how you want that to run so you can anticipate all of the little shortcomings and like quickly put things in place to direct people around it. But like, you got to know what you want. If you don't, like if you just sort of have a general plan, like you've got the materials ready, you've got the workout on the whiteboard, you start talking through it. This is, sort of the equivalent of a teacher just sort of lecturing their way through. But then before you know it, random tangential stories start coming in, and like the kids have not gotten the main point of the lesson. It's the exact same idea of like, have I visualized this? Do I know what my key points are? Boom. If I do, this is going to go a whole lot smoother.
Yeah. So you see teachers essentially not having a vision for what they want the key points that they're transmitting to the students to be.
Yeah.
That they just kind of are like, all right, today we're going to talk about Beowulf and just wing it.
Yeah. 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 Wing it, and not wing it in the larger sense of like, they probably have like materials they're going to put in front of kids, but like, do they actually know what the larger message that they want kids to learn from those materials that day is? Nope. They might have a worksheet to like go through, but like all sorts of things can come into that worksheet unless you focus it really clearly. So teachers often have the external signs of a plan without actually sort of like the internal bones of a plan. They don't really know what things are there for or how to use them in the right way at the right time, how it's going to play out over the class period. Same way in like a CrossFit workout.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Something else that we see is that our coaches get very concerned with the very small minority of gym members who don't listen, push back, potentially have some sort of social or emotional problem. And I mean, this is obviously, again, this is a gym where people are paying money and choosing to be here, right? So this problem is exacerbated tenfold in a school.
Yep.
How do you work with teachers to move past that barrier of, okay, this person is just not going to do what I want them to, and I can't focus on them entirely, or I can't alter my behavior to the class just because of this single individual?
Yeah. It does get a little bit harder in the fact that like, it is still your responsibility as a teacher to get that kid to learn. So it's not quite the same of like, hey, you want to pay money to be at this gym and you don't want to use it the way that it's intended. Okay, that's on you. It's like, actually know that kid who's acting up, like it is your responsibility. You do need to get them to learn. So I think teachers' instincts are sort of like you're saying, of like, let me ignore that person and just get to where I need to be. There's sort of a fine line you've got to walk if that's the case, and depending on sort of the scale of that, like, is it just one kid? Is it actually 30% of your class? Like, what's the scale there, and why is that occurring? And really sort of like the key with all of it is sort of like, get to the why. Like, what's at the root of that behavior? If it's 30% of your class or 50% of your class that aren't following your directions, like, okay, now we've got some real things to dig into. If it's an individual student or two, now we've got some really precise things. And for a while, part of that might be like, I actually need to just sort of minimize that so I can deal with like the 95% of the class and get them going. So then I can go back and deal with you. And I say minimize and not ignore, of like, can I temporarily hit pause on how distracting you are? And then I go back to you once I've got everybody else sort of situated and moving forward. I think more often than not, that's sort of like the tack I like to take of like, okay, how can we just sort of keep this at bay for right now? You get everybody else going because they're going to do what you tell them to do. Kind of ignore that person, but you got to go back to them. You got to get that kid back on track here too, or support them in some sort of different way. That's tough for teachers, especially, like we were talking about at the start of like, if they don't even think that that's their job, that kids should just sort of come in behaving that way. That can be a tough message to get them to understand. On the flip side, they will be so distracted by the one kid that they just ignore the 95%, which is also not good. Because then that one kid has taken control of the class. And the other kids know that. And pretty soon one kid turns into 5 kids, and 5 kids turns into 15, and you've lost all control altogether.
Right. What we've seen is that coaches will be so worried about the occasional bad actor that they'll start to treat other people in the class differently because they are afraid of getting pushback or having someone argue or not listen.
Yeah.
So much so that they start not coaching the 95% of people who want to be coached that way, because they're like, oh, well, people don't like when I coach them.
Yeah.
Because it's like, no, like, that guy doesn't like when you coach him.
Right.
Because he has like an actual problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting as well. Where it's like, because sometimes like you can, and you might need to actually change how you would approach something to get that one kid, knowing it's going to catch all of the others as well. Of like, that might actually be a good adjustment to make in a classroom sometimes, because like then you catch 100% of the kids rather than going at it 95 and then 5%. So sometimes that's okay if the adjustment doesn't negatively affect the others, if it still gets everyone to the same page. It might also highlight some sort of deficiency in your larger skill set. Yeah, it's tough. Sort of that fine line between like, what is my responsibility to the group versus the responsibility to the individuals? The answer is it's to both. But that's the hardest answer to figure out as well, to find solutions to, of like, how do you actually meet both of those needs? It's really circumstantial. I think it's incredibly circumstantial.
Yeah. What about feedback? So if we're talking about developing an administration and an institution to be able to actually coach teachers effectively, constant feedback has to be the most crucial part of that process.
Yep.
Right. And like you mentioned at the beginning, if you're coming into a situation where people have not been receiving feedback, it can be very difficult to even build up that process in the first place.
Yeah.
How do you go about creating, I guess a culture, to use a sort of buzzword, within an institution of like, hey, like, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to give you feedback all the time.
Yeah.
Some of it's going to be good. Some of it's going to be bad, but you just need to like, toughen up and take this because it's part of what we do.
Yeah. I think culture of feedback is exactly the right word for it. I think that's exactly it. If in most cases, I would say, in most of the schools that we work with, they have some general culture of feedback. They're not like totally foreign to the idea of like receiving some sort of information about their performance. Again, I think it's the consistency that eats away at it. Like when that is inconsistent, then I start mistrusting that, or then I question when I do get feedback, or when that consistency is sort of questionably applied, where it's just like, I see you only consistently giving feedback to the bad teachers, or who I think are the bad teachers. Now that I'm getting feedback from you, does that mean I'm a bad teacher? And so I think the biggest thing is like, nope, there is some sort of baseline expectation that we are consistently, come hell or high water, giving to everybody. And I know that some of you are going to give pushback, and we're going to keep doing it. When I as an administrator, as a coach, get that first pushback on my feedback to them, I'm going to go back just the same way I would next week and observe you again and learn from my lessons and keep going. And that's the only way you build a culture, is if you make it consistent and you make it a habit. And like, you will screw up. And I think that's a big part of it. And like, you got to push past the screwing up piece, and you have to get comfortable with like, yeah, you're going to screw that up a few times. And like, some people are going to hate this, and like, you're not going to have strong coaching relationships right away. That's okay. That's all right. You got to keep moving forward. We will figure it out. It would be more detrimental to stop coaching that person than to sort of uncomfortably coach them for the next couple of months. They'll come around, and if they don't, they'll realize that this is not the place for them. If this is the type of place you want to have your school be, then you better do it. You got to keep pushing forward. From a teacher perspective, I think it is seeing utility in it. Once they start to see of like, oh, that's actually not such a bad idea. They actually aren't trying to like fire me or tell me I'm an awful person or that I am bad for kids. But if I do that, it's actually, it makes me better. That helps, but it takes a long time. It just takes some trust, and it takes an accumulation of wins. How
long do you think that usually takes?
It depends. It depends on how ingrained some of those the cultural mindsets are about receiving feedback. I've had some schools that like in a year's time, they've been able to sort of like establish a much stronger culture of it. And I've seen some schools that like aren't as consistent with it, and it's going to take a little bit longer. And some schools just sort of abandon it altogether. But to really flip it and like build a strong system, like we got a multi-year project here. We got something at least 2 years before you really start to see something strong, and probably 3 or 4 before you start to see results from now the strong culture that you've established. So you really got to be in it for the long haul. Like you cannot flinch at the first sign of weakness or failure or pushback.
Yeah, you just have to power through.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with manager tools?
No.
It's like a specific podcast and two guys who talk about management.
I'm not.
It's really interesting. They have a lot of similar concepts, but more from just like management within an organization. And they're huge advocates of 30-minute one-on-ones weekly or every other week, independent of any sort of like operational or work-based meeting. Like you can talk about work, but that's not necessarily what it's for.
Just to be like a personal sit down and like get to know you as a person, just sort of chat.
It's essentially the structure is, 10 minutes for one person, 10 minutes for the other person, then 10 minutes for whatever. And it can be about work. It cannot be about work. It's whatever you want.
Okay.
And I mean, we started implementing that and have just seen massive improvements in trust overall. Do you see teachers or schools having any sort of similar process that helps build trust independent of the actual consistency of like the feedback and observation?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, different schools do that in different ways. I think lots of schools are sort of set up to sort of naturally do that. You've got sort of like the teacher's lounge atmosphere in a lot of places. The extent to which sort of like administrators or coaches are involved in that varies from school to school, of like how much they integrate themselves in that versus like teacher culture, just sort of like that being amongst them. But yeah, I mean, I think like schools in general are sort of like naturally social places. It's like, when you spend all day with children, like you just crave any sort of social contact with anyone over the age of 18, that you're like, yes, let me tell you about everything around the water cooler or, in the teacher's lounge, that like it just sort of naturally happens given that we interact with young people all the time. Like adult relationships and just sort of like some of the more informal stuff, I think happens pretty naturally in a lot of places.
Yeah. Do you see any opportunities to bridge that gap between the administration and the teachers in terms of that just like straight up trust building?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like the administrators who like don't engage in that, I think have a much harder time because then they're sort of seen as like separate and apart, and like people don't know them as what drives them, what they value, and why they're doing the work that they're doing in the school and whatever else, and just what they did on the weekend or what their kids are up to or whatever, what movies they saw. Yeah, I mean, I think like administrators who make a conscious effort to integrate themselves in that way, like have a much easier time. Some people are better at doing that, like just sort of informally, just part of their personality, if they're more social beings, and others have to be much more like conscious and build that into their days. But I do think it makes a huge difference in terms of like how people interact. And when there is a breakdown of trust, that's usually the first thing to go. And then it's like, okay, we're only talking about business, and like, I don't care about you as a person anymore, which also isn't very productive. And you got to sort of get back to that if there has been some sort of breach.
Yeah, because there's so much opportunity for feedback to be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
And you have to go through so much as far as consistency and relationship building in order for that to be something that you can consistently offer without someone taking it as like, oh, I'm being, again, nefariously targeted, or I'm being singled out, or this is only happening because of this. And like, they don't realize that this person did that. And it's just...
Especially if you communicate a lot in writing. And you don't have like in-person coaching time, which oftentimes in a school, like I need to give you written feedback. I'm going to send you an email because we don't have a meeting coming up, and I need to deliver that to you. And that can be misinterpreted in so many ways if I don't actually understand how you as a person communicate or how you as a person would read that communication. I think you're absolutely right.
And how do you separate or integrate this kind of like observation, feedback, coaching process from actual formal, I guess, like performance evaluation? Mm-hmm. Are they one and the same, or are they separate? What does that look like?
Yeah, sort of two sides to the same coin, where they, as much as they are separate, right? They are grounded in the same thing. I think there's a lot of schools who want to integrate them a lot more, and I actually push them away from doing that. Like every time you are in their room should not be an evaluation. Like there needs to be room to experiment and take risks and try new things and feel like it's okay to screw it up, and that you're not going to get dinged for that. When systems of feedback and evaluation are too closely integrated, everything then feels like a judgment, and you can't get to sort of that coaching piece where like the coachee, the teacher, needs to be comfortable like screwing it up and hearing that they screwed it up and then problem solving to make it better next time. You don't create sort of this like laboratory of experimentation. So it does need to be separate in a lot of ways. That said, I do think sort of the things you talk about can be very well aligned to that evaluation. Like if there is a component about classroom management, like you should probably be coaching them around those things that they will be evaluated on. But every time I'm in their room, like they better not feel like I'm grading them, that I'm building a file on all of the things they've done poorly, that there's really a separation of like, dude, this is informal. I'm watching you. We're going to talk about how to make this better so that the next time there is the formal thing that comes up, we're going to see some growth and progress. There has to be like a clear delineation. Most schools will have separate people do those things, where like you have a separate coach and a separate evaluator. Oftentimes it's sort of mandated to do that, where like the principal themselves has to be the formal evaluator. And then if you do receive coaching, it's oftentimes from somebody else. In many places that it's not the case.
That intuitively to me, that seems like a bad idea to separate them.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, in schools,
I have no idea.
Yeah, I found it to be more challenging in schools where that is the same person, because the teacher views then any coaching they receive as an evaluation, that like that evaluator is constantly building this portfolio about and potentially against them. And so having a separate person is oftentimes more productive in this setting. I think there are ways around that. And I think a lot of that has to do with trust and how that's messaged, of like evaluation versus sort of like informal feedback and coaching. I've seen people do it well and poorly in that setting. So it's more about execution and messaging there, I think.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know where my intuition actually lies on that, but it seems like whoever the evaluator is in that context would just be viewed as like a bad guy, quote unquote, no matter what.
Yeah.
If they don't have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And does that end up being the case, or? It
can be, but I mean, even in the case where they're separate, I think there's still efforts on the evaluator's part, which is oftentimes the principal, who doesn't have time or capacity to coach in the very consistent formal sense, but they do need to do the evaluation, where they still are getting to know each of their teachers, to form a personal relationship, because they're running the school, they're there all of the day, they're interacting with them on a variety of different levels. So it's not quite as separate of like this person just sort of dropping in. Oftentimes that evaluator is still somebody they interact with every single day in a variety of ways. But interestingly enough, like thinking about like coming in as an outsider, that this helps us a lot, in fact, because like we are so removed from any system of evaluation that quote unquote matters to the teacher, that all we are is sort of a helpful external voice. So I think that also, that gives us a lot of cred with them, where like they know we have no sort of managerial or evaluative capacity over them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah. It's so tricky to balance people's emotions, because it's so easy for them to come up with all kinds of stories about why they're being targeted or singled out, or,
Yeah, which then goes back to like, if you're just coaching everybody, no one feels singled out and targeted. Like, and everybody needs coaching. So, let's just coach everybody to some high level of baseline expectation.
Cal, this is great stuff. It's very interesting.
Thank you. It is great to talk about it, Todd.
Yeah.
There's many parallels between the fitness world and the teaching world.
Yeah, completely. Because I mean, we didn't even really talk about, the individual coaching of students either.
Right.
Which is a whole different conversation as well.
But I mean, there's plenty about our business model that I've actually sort of like found a lot of inspiration from like the fitness industry, and just sort of the concept of like, why would you pay a bunch of money to go to a CrossFit gym? Like, it's kind of the same reason that you would pay a bunch of money to have like an education consultant come in and help you with your coaching. Even sort of how we've developed our program and how we've pitched it. I've gotten a lot of ideas from just analogous situations in the gym.
Yeah, even if you know what to do, you're not going to do it.
Yep.
Like you need someone to help you. You need someone to help you prioritize.
Yep. Even the best person needs coaching. Even Elizabeth gets coached in the gym here.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So you also have a podcast.
I do.
A little more nitty gritty on education and education policy. And all that
it's called
kind of
Class
stuff.
Dismissed.
Yeah.
Yeah. For all the conversations you need to have after the kids leave.
Yeah. That's a really good name.
Thank you.
It's like, you're just like, oh yeah, that's what an education podcast should be called.
That's right. Yeah. For a while we were like, let's call it the Teacher's Lounge. Then that felt too trite. And we were like, nope, class dismissed. That's what we're going for. So yeah, we're on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your pods. You can find us.
Yeah. What about the Fulcrum site? What's the deal there? Should people go to it?
Yeah.
Is there a blog? Do you guys do other stuff? What's going on?
So you can check out our website, fulcrumeducationsolutions.com. It's a long address. Fulcrum.com was already taken, much to my chagrin, so we had to go with the long one.
How much does Fulcrum.com cost?
Too much.
$50,000?
Too much for me to buy it from another company. So fulcrumeducationsolutions.com. If you are in education or know anyone in education, check it out. We've got some blog posts up there. I don't blog nearly as frequently as I should. Usually when the inspiration strikes me or one of my teammates says like, hey, you haven't done that in a while, you should do it. Then I'll do it. But
yeah, people love the audio content though.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a little easier to digest, I think. So check that out. We also are starting a new product that's sort of loosely based off of the Whole Life Challenge, which is sort of like a health and wellness challenge.
Is that the same as Whole30?
It's kind of like the Whole30. Okay. It's different than
same
the
company?
No, different company, but similar ideas.
Tricky.
Yeah, I know, right? Anyways, it's called the Decisive Element Challenge. It comes from a famous educational quote about like, I am the decisive element in my classroom. I make the weather, Anyways, it's sort of like a 6-week reflection challenge for teachers to take 5 minutes a day to basically rate themselves on a red, yellow, green scale on like these 8 big buckets of teaching, like maintaining a clear focus, requiring thinking, maximizing participation, just like some basic things about teaching that teachers often overlook in like the day-to-day just doing of school. So we're getting that launched in the spring. So check that out as well. It's tdechallenge.com. So the Decisive Element Challenge, TDE Challenge.
That sounds great. I actually want to have our coaches do that.
Yeah.
It's probably not exactly the same, but there's probably enough there.
Totally.
It's like, oh, this is a good idea.
You could find plenty of parallels.
Yeah.
Great.
What about you, Cal? Do you want people to pay attention to you on the internet, or just your company?
I've consciously minimized my social media presence. After 2016, I was like, this is just sort of a cesspool of negativity. So I still have a Facebook, I still have a Twitter, I just don't go on it. I still have an Instagram, but I deleted all the apps from my phone, so I don't go on it very much. Yeah, there's not much interesting content that you're going to get from Cal Wysocki personally.
Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.